a land of towering mountains, endless deserts, ancient cities, and proud tribes, has stood for thousands of years at the crossroads of civilizations. It is a country where conquerors marched, empires collided, religions spread, and cultures blended into a rich and complex identity unlike any other in the world. Situated between Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East, Afghanistan became a gateway connecting powerful kingdoms and mighty empires. Traders crossed its valleys carrying silk, spices, gold, and ideas. Armies thundered through its mountain passes, seeking glory and conquest. Yet despite centuries of invasions, wars, and political struggles, the people of Afghanistan endured, preserving their traditions, languages, honor, and fierce spirit of independence. Long before modern borders existed, ancient communities settled in the fertile valleys of what is now Afghanistan. Archaeologists discovered evidence of human life dating back tens of thousands of years. Early farmers cultivated wheat and barley along rivers, while herders moved through high mountain pastures with sheep and goats. Small villages slowly grew into organized settlements. Over time, these communities became part of larger civilizations connected to ancient Persia, India, and Central Asia. One of the earliest major civilizations linked to Afghanistan was the Oxus civilization, also known as the Bactrian-Marjana archaeological complex. Flourishing around 2200 BCE, this civilization developed sophisticated cities, trade routes, and artistic traditions. Ancient merchants traveled through Afghanistan carrying precious stones such as lapis lazuli, a deep blue gemstone mined in Badakhshan that became highly prized across the ancient world. Egyptian pharaohs, Mesopotamian kings, and Persian nobles all valued Afghan lapis lazuli. Even in ancient times, Afghanistan occupied a strategic and economically important position. As centuries passed, Indo-Iranian tribes migrated into the region. These peoples brought early forms of language and religion that would shape future cultures. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, spread across parts of Afghanistan under the influence of ancient Persian kingdoms. Fire temples stood in cities and villages while priests taught ideas about truth, justice, and the eternal struggle between good and evil. By the 6th century BCE, much of Afghanistan became part of the mighty Achaemenid Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great. Persian kings ruled vast territories stretching from Egypt to India. Afghanistan was divided into provinces known as satrapies. Roads connected cities, taxes were collected, and imperial authority spread across the mountains and valleys. Yet Afghanistan was never an easy land to control. Tribal groups guarded their independence fiercely, and distant rulers often struggled to maintain complete authority. In 330 BCE, a young Macedonian conqueror named Alexander the Great entered Afghanistan during his campaign against the Persian Empire. Alexander had already defeated the Persian king Darius III and now sought to secure the eastern territories of the empire. What he expected to be a swift conquest turned into one of the most difficult campaigns of his life. Afghanistan's rugged terrain and determined resistance challenged Alexander's armies repeatedly. Local warriors used guerrilla tactics, attacking from mountains and disappearing into valleys. Despite his military genius, Alexander faced constant rebellions. He captured cities, founded settlements, and married Roxana, a noblewoman from Bactria, partly to strengthen alliances with local elites. Several cities established during his campaigns later became important centers of trade and culture. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire fragmented among his generals. Afghanistan became part of the Seleucid Empire before eventually falling under the influence of the Mauryan Empire from India. During this era, Buddhism spread into Afghanistan, transforming the region culturally and spiritually. Buddhism flourished spectacularly in ancient Afghanistan. Monasteries, stupas, and giant statues appeared across the land. The city of Bamiyan became famous for its enormous Buddha statues carved into cliffs. Towering over travelers on the Silk Road, these statues symbolized Afghanistan's role as a bridge between East and West. Buddhist monks traveled through the region, teaching philosophy and preserving knowledge. The Kushan Empire emerged around the 1st century CE and became one of the greatest powers in the region. Under rulers such as Kanishk, the empire controlled territories stretching from Central Asia to northern India. Trade expanded enormously. Afghanistan became a key part of the Silk Road, linking China, India, Persia, and the Mediterranean world. Merchants carried silk, spices, ivory, gems, and ideas across these routes. Greek, Persian, Indian, and Central Asian influences mixed together, creating a unique cultural fusion visible in art, architecture, and religion. Gandharan art developed during this period, blending Greek artistic styles with Buddhist themes. Sculptures of the Buddha displayed realistic human forms influenced by Hellenistic traditions introduced after Alexander's conquest. This remarkable artistic movement demonstrated Afghanistan's role as a meeting place of civilizations. However, prosperity also attracted invaders. Over the centuries, Afghanistan experienced repeated waves of conquest. The Sasanians from Persia fought for control. Nomadic tribes from Central Asia swept through the region. The Hephthalites, often called the White Huns, established dominance for a time before eventually collapsing. In the 7th century CE, a new force emerged from the Arabian Peninsula. Muslim armies inspired by Islam expanded rapidly across the Middle East and Central Asia. Arab forces gradually entered Afghanistan, bringing profound religious and cultural transformation. The spread of Islam was not immediate or uniform. Some regions converted quickly while others resisted for generations. Over time, however, Islam became the dominant faith across Afghanistan. Islamic civilization transformed Afghan society. Mosques replaced Buddhist monasteries in many areas. Persian language and literature flourished under Muslim dynasties. Great scholars, poets, scientists, and philosophers emerged from the region. Cities such as Balkh, Herat, and Ghazni became important centers of learning and culture. One of the most powerful early Islamic dynasties in Afghanistan was the Ghaznavid Empire, founded by Mahmud of Ghazni in the 10th century. Mahmud transformed Ghazni into a magnificent capital filled with palaces, libraries, gardens, and mosques. He launched numerous military campaigns into the Indian subcontinent, expanding his wealth and influence. His empire stretched across large parts of modern Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, and Central Asia. The Ghaznavid court attracted scholars and poets, including the famous Persian poet Ferdowsi, author of the Shahnameh, one of the greatest epic poems in Persian literature. Afghanistan during this era became deeply connected to the broader Persianate world, where Persian culture, language, and intellectual traditions flourished. After the Ghaznavids declined, the Ghurid Empire rose to prominence in the 12th century. Originating from the mountainous region of Ghor in central Afghanistan, the Ghurids expanded rapidly under rulers such as Muhammad Ghori. They conquered large territories in northern India, laying foundations for future Muslim rule in the subcontinent. Yet once again, Afghanistan's strategic position exposed it to devastating invasions. In the 13th century, the Mongols under Genghis Khan descended upon the region with terrifying force. Cities that resisted were destroyed. Entire populations were massacred. Ancient centers of civilization suffered immense devastation. Balkh, Herat, and Bamiyan endured catastrophic destruction. The Mongol invasion remains one of the darkest chapters in Afghan history. Genghis Khan himself reportedly ordered the destruction of Bamiyan after one of his grandsons was killed during battle there. The violence shattered economies, depopulated cities, and transformed political structures across Central Asia. Despite the destruction, Afghan society gradually recovered. Successor states emerged from the ruins of the Mongol Empire. In the 14th century, Timur, also known as Tamerlane, conquered Afghanistan while building a vast empire centered in Central Asia. Though often brutal, Timur also patronized art, architecture, and scholarship. Herat flourished during the Timurid period and became one of the greatest cultural capitals of the Islamic world. Magnificent mosques, schools, gardens, and libraries were built. Persian miniature painting, poetry, calligraphy, and architecture reached extraordinary heights. The city attracted scholars, artists, and intellectuals from across the region. As the Timurid Empire weakened, Afghanistan became contested among rising regional powers, including the Safavid Persians, the Uzbek Khanates, and the Mughal Empire in India. Tribal politics grew increasingly important. Among the Pashtun tribes of southern Afghanistan, new leaders emerged who would shape the future of the country. In 1709, Mirwais Hotak led a successful revolt against Safavid Persian rule in Kandahar. This uprising marked an important moment in Afghan political identity. The Hotak dynasty briefly established Afghan rule over large territories, including parts of Persia. However, it was Ahmad Shah Durrani who was widely regarded as the founder of modern Afghanistan. In 1747, following the assassination of the Persian ruler Nader Shah, Afghan tribal leaders gathered near Kandahar and selected Ahmad Shah as their king. He founded the Durrani Empire, uniting many Afghan tribes under one political authority. Ahmad Shah Durrani proved an exceptional military leader and statesman. His empire expanded rapidly across Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and parts of northern India. He conducted campaigns deep into the Indian subcontinent and became known as Ahmad Shah Baba, meaning father of the nation. The Durrani Empire established the foundations of the Afghan state. Yet governing Afghanistan remained immensely difficult due to tribal rivalries, regional divisions, and geographic challenges. After Ahmad Shah's death in 1772, internal conflicts weakened the empire. Throughout the 19th century, Afghanistan became trapped between expanding imperial powers. The British Empire controlled India to the south, while the Russian Empire advanced through Central Asia from the north. This geopolitical rivalry became known as the Great Game. Britain feared that Russian influence in Afghanistan could threaten India, the crown jewel of the British Empire. Russian expansion, meanwhile, alarmed British strategists. Afghanistan thus became a crucial buffer state between rival empires. The First Anglo-Afghan War began in 1839 when British forces invaded Afghanistan to install a ruler favorable to British interests. Initially, the invasion succeeded. Kabul was occupied and Shah Shuja placed on the throne. However, Afghan resentment against foreign occupation soon erupted into rebellion. In 1841, Afghan fighters launched an uprising in Kabul. British forces attempted to retreat through mountain passes during winter. The retreat became one of the greatest disasters in British military history. Thousands of soldiers and civilians were killed as Afghan warriors attacked the column through snow-covered valleys. Only a handful survived. The British later returned with punitive expeditions before eventually withdrawing. The war demonstrated Afghanistan's reputation as a graveyard of empires where foreign powers struggled to impose control. A second Anglo-Afghan war erupted in 1878 after tensions involving Russian diplomacy. Once again, British forces invaded. After fears, fighting Afghanistan accepted British influence over its foreign affairs while maintaining internal autonomy. Abdur Rahman Khan emerged as ruler during this period and became known as the Iron Emir. He centralized power ruthlessly, suppressing rebellions and strengthening the Afghan state. He also established many of Afghanistan's modern borders through agreements with British India and neighboring powers. One of the most controversial decisions of this era was the Durand Line Agreement of 1893 between Afghanistan and British India. This border divided Pashtun tribal territories and remains disputed today between Afghanistan and Pakistan. In the early 20th century, Afghanistan continued seeking independence from foreign influence. Amanullah Khan became ruler in 1919 and launched the Third Anglo-Afghan War. Though brief, the conflict resulted in Britain recognizing Afghanistan's full independence in foreign affairs. Amanullah Khan introduced ambitious reforms aimed at modernizing Afghanistan. He promoted education, infrastructure development, women's rights, and legal reforms. Influenced by modernization efforts in Turkey and elsewhere, he sought to transform Afghan society rapidly. However, conservative tribal and religious leaders opposed many reforms. Resistance grew across the country. By 1929, Amanullah was forced to abdicate after rebellions destabilized the kingdom. The following decades brought relative stability under King Zahir Shah, who ruled from 1933 to 1973. Afghanistan pursued neutrality during World War II and later balanced relations between the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War. Both superpowers invested in Afghan infrastructure projects. Roads, dams, schools, and airports were constructed. Kabul developed into a cosmopolitan city where students, intellectuals, and tourists gathered. Afghan women in urban areas increasingly participated in education and professional life. Yet beneath the surface, political tensions simmered. Economic inequality, ideological struggles, and regional divisions persisted. In 1973, Muhammad Daud Khan, a cousin of the king, overthrew the monarchy in a bloodless coup and declared Afghanistan a republic. Daud initially pursued modernization and nationalism, but faced growing opposition from both Islamists and communists. In 1978, communist officers linked to the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan carried out the Soor Revolution, assassinating Daud and seizing power. The communist government introduced radical reforms, including land redistribution, secularization, and expanded women's rights. However, these policies triggered fierce resistance from conservative rural communities and religious leaders. Political repression intensified. Thousands were arrested, tortured, or executed. Afghanistan descended into chaos. Armed insurgencies erupted across the country. Concerned about the collapse of the communist regime, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in December 1979. The Soviet invasion marked the beginning of one of the most devastating periods in Afghan history. Soviet troops entered Kabul, killed Afghan leader Hafizullah Amin, and installed a more loyal government. Moscow expected a quick stabilization mission. Instead, the Soviet Union became trapped in a brutal guerrilla war. Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen waged jihad against Soviet forces and the communist government. Fighters operated from mountains and villages, using guerrilla tactics similar to those employed against earlier invaders. The war soon became an international conflict shaped by Cold War politics. The United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, China, and other countries supported the Mujahideen with weapons, training, and funding. The CIA worked closely with Pakistan's intelligence services to channel aid into Afghanistan. Millions of Afghan civilians suffered immensely during the war. Villages were bombed. Landmines spread across the countryside. Entire communities fled. Refugee camps in Pakistan and Iran filled with displaced Afghans. The human cost was staggering. Hundreds of thousands died while millions became refugees. Afghanistan's economy, infrastructure, and social fabric were devastated. Despite superior military technology, Soviet forces struggled against determined resistance and difficult terrain. Mujahideen fighters used portable Stinger missiles supplied by the United States to shoot down Soviet helicopters and aircraft. The war drained Soviet resources and morale. By the late 1980s, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev sought withdrawal. Soviet troops finally left Afghanistan in 1989. However, peace did not follow. The communist government survived for several years before collapsing in 1992. Mujahideen factions entered Kabul but soon turned against one another in a brutal civil war. Different commanders and ethnic factions battled for control of the capital. Kabul suffered terrible destruction from rocket attacks, artillery bombardments, and street fighting. Civilians endured unimaginable hardship. Amid the chaos, a new movement emerged in southern Afghanistan. The Taliban, composed largely of religious students from Pashtun areas and refugee camps, promised to restore order, enforce Islamic law, and end corruption. Led by Mullah Muhammad Omar, the Taliban rapidly gained territory. Many Afghans initially welcomed them because they reduced banditry and established security in areas under their control. In 1996, the Taliban captured Kabul and established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Their rule imposed extremely strict interpretations of Islamic law. Women were barred from most education and employment. Public executions and harsh punishments became common. The Taliban also provided sanctuary to Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. During the late 1990s, Afghanistan became increasingly isolated internationally. On September 11, 2001, al-Qaeda terrorists carried out attacks against the United States, killing thousands of people. The U.S. government demanded that the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden. The Taliban refused. In October 2001, the United States and allied forces launched military operations against the Taliban regime. Supported by Afghan anti-Taliban groups known as the Northern Alliance, UAS, forces rapidly toppled the Taliban government. A new Afghan government backed by the international community was established under Hamid Karzai. Massive international aid poured into the country. Schools reopened. Millions of children, including girls, returned to education. Infrastructure projects expanded. Elections were held. Yet the Taliban were not defeated completely. Insurgency gradually intensified across rural areas. Corruption within the Afghan government undermined public trust. Civilian casualties, warlord influence, poverty, and political instability continued. The United States and NATO became involved in a prolonged conflict lasting 2 decades. Thousands of foreign soldiers and Afghan civilians died. Despite enormous spending and military operations, stability remained elusive. Afghanistan's complex tribal structures, regional rivalries, corruption, and foreign interference made nation-building extraordinarily difficult. Many Afghans hoped for peace, but remained trapped between insurgency, government weakness, and international geopolitics. Ashraf Ghani became president in 2014 after disputed elections. Meanwhile, negotiations between the United States and the Taliban eventually began. In 2020, the Doha Agreement outlined plans for the withdrawal of American troops. As foreign forces withdrew, in 2021, the Taliban launched a rapid offensive across Afghanistan. Province after province fell with surprising speed. Afghan security forces collapsed in many areas. In August 2021, the Taliban entered Kabul as President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. Scenes of chaos unfolded at Kabul airport as thousands attempted to escape. The return of Taliban rule marked another dramatic turning point in Afghan history. Many Afghans feared restrictions on women's rights, political freedoms, and civil liberties. The Taliban promised moderation compared to their earlier rule, but concerns from the international community persisted. Afghanistan now faces enormous challenges including economic crisis, humanitarian emergencies, political isolation, and ongoing security threats. Millions struggle with poverty, food shortages, and uncertainty about the future. Yet throughout its long and turbulent history, Afghanistan has repeatedly demonstrated resilience. Its people endured invasions, empires, civil wars, and foreign occupations while preserving deep traditions of honor, hospitality, poetry, faith, and independence. Afghan culture remains rich and diverse. Pashtun, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, Turkmen, Baloch, Nuristanis, and many other communities contribute to the country's identity. Languages such as Dari and Pashto carry centuries of literature and storytelling. Poetry occupies a special place in Afghan life. Poets like Rumi, born in Balkh, became world famous for spiritual and philosophical works. Music, carpet weaving, miniature art, calligraphy, and storytelling traditions survived despite decades of conflict. Afghanistan's geography has always shaped its destiny. The Hindu Kush Mountains divide regions while strategic passes connect empires. Harsh winters, remote valleys, and difficult terrain repeatedly challenged invaders throughout history. Foreign powers often underestimated Afghanistan's complexity. From Alexander the Great to the British Empire, from the Soviet Union to the United States, outside forces discovered that military victory did not guarantee political control. At the same time, Afghanistan's internal divisions frequently complicated efforts to build lasting unity. Tribal loyalties, ethnic identities, ideological movements, and regional interests shaped politics for centuries. Still, the idea of Afghanistan endured. Despite changing rulers and shifting borders, generations of Afghans maintained strong attachments to their homeland. Villages rebuilt after destruction. Markets reopened after wars. Families preserved traditions across centuries of upheaval. The modern history of Afghanistan cannot be understood simply through war and conflict alone. It is also a story of endurance, cultural richness, scholarship, trade, and survival. Ancient Afghan cities once stood among the great centers of civilization. Herat dazzled visitors with magnificent architecture and literature. Balkh became known as the mother of cities. Kandahar linked trade routes between Persia, India, and Central Asia. Kabul evolved through many eras from ancient settlement to modern capital. Afghanistan's strategic location ensured that it remained connected to world history. Ideas, religions, technologies, and peoples crossed its land for millennia. Buddhism spread toward East Asia through Afghan routes. Islamic scholarship flourished in Afghan cities. Trade networks linked distant civilizations. Even today, Afghanistan continues influencing regional and global politics. Its stability affects neighboring countries and international security. Competing powers still seek influence there, much as empires did centuries ago. For ordinary Afghans, however, daily life revolves less around geopolitics and more around survival, family, honor, faith, and hope for peace. Farmers cultivate wheat and pomegranates in fertile valleys. Nomads move through mountain pastures. Craftsmen weave carpets using ancient techniques. Children play in villages scarred by decades of war, yet filled with resilience. Afghan hospitality remains legendary. Guests are often welcomed warmly with tea, bread, rice, and conversation regardless of hardship. Family and tribal ties remain powerful social foundations. Religion also continues shaping Afghan society deeply. Islam provides moral guidance, community identity, and spiritual meaning for most Afghans. Religious scholars and local traditions influence everyday life in both urban and rural communities. Women's roles in Afghanistan have changed dramatically across different periods and regions. Urban women in some eras experienced significant educational and professional opportunities, while conservative rural traditions often limited freedoms. The struggle over women's rights became one of the central political and cultural issues in modern Afghan history. Education likewise experienced cycles of expansion and destruction. Universities once attracted students from across the region, yet wars repeatedly disrupted schooling and intellectual life. Still, many Afghans continue valuing learning despite enormous obstacles. Afghanistan's economy historically relied on agriculture, trade, and pastoralism. Farmers cultivated wheat, fruits, nuts, and saffron. Caravan routes carried goods across Asia. Modern conflicts, however, severely damaged economic development. Opium production became a major issue during recent decades, funding armed groups and criminal networks while creating international controversy. At the same time, Afghanistan possesses significant untapped mineral resources including copper, lithium, rare earth elements, and precious stones. Environmental challenges further complicate the country's future. Droughts, deforestation, water shortages, and climate change threaten livelihoods in rural areas where millions depend on agriculture. Afghanistan's youth represent another important dimension of its future. A large percentage of the population was born during decades of war. Many young Afghans grew up amid conflict, yet aspire toward education, technology, employment, and connection with the wider world. Social media and mobile technology increasingly influence Afghan society despite political restrictions and economic difficulties. Young people in cities especially engage with global culture while balancing traditional values. The Afghan diaspora also plays a major role. Millions of Afghans live abroad in Pakistan, Iran, Europe, North America, and elsewhere. Refugees carried Afghan culture across the world while maintaining ties to their homeland. Throughout history, Afghanistan repeatedly stood at the center of major historical transformations. Ancient empires fought for its territory. Religions spread through its mountains and valleys. Trade routes enriched its cities. Colonial rivalries shaped its borders. Cold War conflicts turned into a battlefield between superpowers. Yet Afghanistan was never merely a passive victim of history. Afghan leaders, tribes, scholars, merchants, poets, and warriors actively shaped events across Asia for centuries. The Durrani Empire once ranked among the great powers of the region. Afghan dynasties influenced northern India and Persia. Afghan scholars contributed to Islamic civilization. Afghan resistance movements altered global politics during the Soviet-Afghan War. Even the failures of foreign empires in Afghanistan carried worldwide consequences. Britain's disasters in Afghanistan influenced imperial policy. The Soviet War contributed to the weakening of the USSR. The post 2001 conflict reshaped international security policies for decades. Today, historians continue debating many aspects of Afghan history. Some emphasize the role of tribal structures. Others focus on foreign interference, geography, religion, or economic conditions. In reality, Afghanistan's story involves all these factors interacting across centuries. Understanding Afghanistan requires recognizing both its diversity and unity. No single ethnic group or political ideology fully defines the nation. Afghanistan contains multiple identities layered together through history. The country's landscapes themselves reflect this diversity. Snow-covered peaks rise above green valleys. Ancient fortresses overlook deserts. Bustling bazaars contrast with isolated mountain villages. Caravans once crossed paths with modern highways. Music and oral storytelling preserve memories of heroes, tragedies, and love stories passed down through generations. Traditional instruments accompany songs about honor, exile, beauty, and homeland. Afghan cuisine reflects centuries of cultural exchange. Rice dishes, kebabs, naan bread, dried fruits, and tea connect influences from Persia, Central Asia, and South Asia. Sports also carry deep cultural significance. Buzkashi, a traditional horseback game involving fierce competition and extraordinary riding skill, remains one of Afghanistan's most famous national sports. Despite hardship, Afghan creativity persisted. Painters, filmmakers, writers, photographers, and musicians continued producing art even under censorship, war, and exile. The destruction of cultural heritage during conflicts deeply affected many Afghans. The Taliban's demolition of the Bamiyan Buddhas in 2001 shocked the world and symbolized the loss of irreplaceable historical treasures. Nevertheless, archaeological discoveries continue revealing Afghanistan's ancient importance. Buried cities, Buddhist monasteries, manuscripts, coins, and artworks provide evidence of civilizations that flourished there long before modern conflicts. Many Afghans dream of a peaceful future where their country can rebuild after decades of suffering. Such hopes face enormous obstacles including political uncertainty, economic collapse, humanitarian crises, and international tensions. Still, Afghanistan's history teaches that the country repeatedly survived upheaval. Kingdoms rose and fell. Empires invaded and withdrew. Cities were destroyed and rebuilt. Generations endured exile and returned home. The spirit of Afghanistan lives not only in governments or armies, but in its people, in farmers planting crops after war, in mothers educating children despite danger, in poets writing verses about hope, and in communities preserving traditions through centuries of change. From ancient caravan routes to modern geopolitical struggles, Afghanistan remained one of the world's most historically significant crossroads. Its story contains glory and tragedy, resilience and suffering, conquest and resistance. The mountains of Afghanistan witnessed armies marching beneath their shadows for thousands of years. Persian kings, Greek conquerors, Buddhist monks, Mongol horsemen, British soldiers, Soviet tanks, and American helicopters all became part of its long history. Yet beyond every invasion and every empire stood the enduring Afghan people themselves, proud, resilient, diverse, and deeply connected to their land. Afghanistan's future remains uncertain, but its past is one of the richest and most dramatic histories on Earth. It is a story stretching from ancient civilizations to modern wars, from Buddhist monasteries to Islamic empires, from tribal kingdoms to global conflicts. And through every century, Afghanistan endured.